Well, good afternoon, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And I'll just break right in this. The title of today's message is Contentment. I had an original, another title, but that one's not really too fitting, I don't believe. But what I do have is one, because the phrase contentment really is a bit more fitting, I believe. I know Raquel's giving me that look. She likes it.
No, don't worry, be happy.
Don't worry about it. Well,
yeah, okay.
maybe can we fix that later?
Amara can.
Okay, Mara knows how. Good. The original title is just not very befitting the message. Now, I may keep that title for a later day, for another time. But first things first, before we go into any scriptures, let me tell you real briefly about say. First things first, let's define contentment. So, anyone care to take a shot at what contentment, how contentment might be defined? Yes, Tino. First Tino, then Trey.
Well, just being satisfied with what you got.
Being satisfied with what you got, that is actually pretty much the core of today's message, Tino. Because by the time we go through a few scriptures, relevant scriptures, then we're going to go into the story of King Solomon on how this all works. Trey, you had yours up.
Essentially the same thing. I was just going to say a feeling of fulfillment. Fulfilling. Yeah. Satisfied, fulfilled, same thing.
Yes, it's a feeling of satisfaction regardless of your current state. And I think most of us can agree with that because things could always, no matter how bad things are, a lot of times, things could always be a lot worse. No matter how good things are, there's always for something better. Because if we're in a state of anxiety and dread about how bad things could, or they could be worse. They could always be worse. And that will, in fact, if we're living in this constant state of anxiety, that will in fact destroy our feeling of contentment. On the other hand, well, we could be worrying about how much better things could be. Oh, if I only had this one, I had that one. Had this, that, and some other thing. And actually, we're going to start off with a couple of brief warnings about anxiety. Just very briefly touch that base. I have anxiety defined as an agitated state of mind produced by fear. Now, it's debatable whether these fears are real or imagined because they can be one, the other, or what's the answer so many times? Both, yes. The fears involved don't have to be just one or the other. They can be both. Now, I see a few heads nodding up and down. Good. So we are on the same page. So how do we learn to be content? Let's try it. Let's start off Matthew 6, please. Got a few scriptures about what it means to be content. And if for too long, we're going to tie this into the account of King Solomon. See how this actually works. Matthew 6. We'll pick it up in verse 25. Therefore, I say to you, do not worry about your life, or what you will eat, or what you will drink, nor about your body, and what you will put on, and what kind of clothes you will wear. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They don't reap or sow or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more value than they are? Which of you by worrying, being anxious, add 1 cubit to his stature? Gee, I wish I was taller. I wish I was tall like that. Like this, that, or some other basketball player, right? I wish I was taller than Johans, right? Yet I say to you, that not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed like. Why do you worry about your clothing? Yet consider the lilies of the field, verse 28. I skipped a verse. Why do you worry about your clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, about how they grow, and they neither toil nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. We're going to read a little bit here after a bit about some of the glory of Solomon, actually. Please keep this verse in mind when we go to Solomon and all his riches and glory. Now, if Yahweh clothes the grass of the field, which today is here, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore don't worry, saying, well, what are we going to eat? What shall we drink? What am I going to wear? For all these things the Gentiles seek. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. Really, Yahweh already knows that. He knows we need all this. But seek first the kingdom of Elohim, the kingdom of heaven and Yahweh, and his righteousness. And all these things will be added to you. Therefore don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. We touched on that a little bit actually during today's announcements, when we read about vaccination mandates coming out of Louisiana. We're here in Texas, as things stand, that doesn't apply to us so much. And we can praise Yah for that. In fact, we do have things like exemptions for reasons of conscience, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, or religious exemptions, and perhaps other reasons that I'm not up to speed on. But we got some health providers in Louisiana making it plain they don't care. That's evidently not going to be the case. It's also the case in other places like Florida, California, and several other places throughout this country. Any question or comment? Now, if we're in this, let's do a contrast here. The instruction was truly about how to be, on what we should think about in being content. Just don't give any undue worry. Don't worry about this state of mind. Don't worry about this agitated state about the clothes you're wearing or the kind of car you're driving or what kind of food you're going to eat and all this other stuff listed. We'll touch on a couple other scriptures to that as well. Murmuring can also help ruin our contentment. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 10:10. 1 Corinthians 10:10. Verse 9. I'm going to start in verse 9 actually. Let us not tempt Messiah, as some of them did also tempted, and they were destroyed by the serpent. That's a reference to Exodus. Nor complain, as some of them also complained, and they were destroyed by the destroyer. How many times did we read of in Exodus about people suffering punishments, whether they're being destroyed, the suffering a death penalty, or other penalties, due to their murmuring and their constant complaining? Weren't these people complaining about what they were going to drink? Weren't they worried about what they were going to eat? Yahweh drug us all out in the middle of this here desert, only to starve us and kill us all. He gives them manna. And it's not too long before they complain about that, isn't it? Bring us some quail. Oh, we had some meat to eat. I'd really love some chicken fried quail about now. Hebrews 13:5 warns us about greed and envy. Let your conduct be without covetousness. And be content with such things as you have. And that's really the core of this verse here. And it's also a good, healthy part of the core of this message. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. So we boldly may say, well, Yahweh is my helper, and I will not fear. Now what can man do to me? By being greedy, open for unrighteous gain. What happened to the sons of Eli the priest in the story of Samuel? They were killed in a battle with Philistines. Plus the Philistines captured the ark. And when Eli the priest got the news, what happened to him? He died. He went into cardiac. He went into cardiac and died. Starting off with a few of these scriptures, it helps build a contrast, if you will, because sometimes that's the best way to paint a picture, if you will, or explain a concept. Let's try James 3:16. James 3:16. For where envy and self-seeking exists, confusion and every evil thing are there. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. So let's ask a question. How will this apply to a situation, say, such as the Exodus? Where evil, where envy, and self-seeking exists. After all these people were just freed out of Egypt. They're all slaves. They're all free men now. What kind of self-seeking and desires and greed can emerge out of a concept, out of an environment like that? Anybody?
The cow, the golden calf.
Yes, that's one example, Kathy. Very good.
Is that what you're asking?
Well, that's one good answer. That's good.
I mean, because they didn't wait 5 minutes before they.
Well, Moses was gone, and Yahweh's taking too long. We don't know what happened to Moses. We need another leader. Someone taking the example, not the example, but the opportunity to be the leader of Israel, to be the judge of Israel. Stepped up, worked up this big party, and made this golden calf. Here, look at here. Now we're going to go back to Egypt because we're all going to starve to death out here, but they'll take us back if we go with this here golden calf. And tomorrow morning we're going to sing praises to it and have a big old party with it. That's very good, Kathy. Anyone else?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, the question? Do we have any what further instances do we have out of an environment like the Exodus that this can happen in? I mean, certainly we wouldn't think, but that something like this could happen, but it did. How about you know, where we can potentially people have greed and envy and self-seeking. Yes, Daniel.
Nathan and Cora.
Cora, very good, yes. Cora, Cora's excellent example. It's probably the best one, actually, if you know what I think. Yes, Cora. Because in all the Levitical structure, we have to remember, he was a very high-ranking member of the Levites. He and his family were right underneath, you know, the Moses and the priesthood, and that wasn't good enough. He wanted to be the high priest himself. You take on too much for yourself, Moses. We're all holy. Yes, Robert.
Pharisees' jealousy of Yahshua the Messiah.
Pharisees' jealousy of Joshua, very good. Yeah, who's this carpenter over here? We're all educated. From people like Gamaliel and Hillel and I can't think. There's another name. It's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't. But anyway, Trey, you had yours up.
I would say Saul's a good example as well.
Cause what?
Saul. King
Saul.
King Saul.
King Saul?
Yes.
David.
Around the time of his downfall, when David was the new appointed leader of Israel. Now, you know, David had a lot of stuff running away from him.
Jealousy and faction.
Yeah.
The jealousy factor.
Searching out through other means instead of Yahweh.
He sought every means to hold on to it except for Yahweh. Very good.
Yeah.
Trey. Tino.
To Trey's point too with Saul, when he did the sacrifice himself, when he didn't wait for Samuel.
Yes.
Samuel told him he did foolishly for not doing that. So he wasn't content enough to wait.
You're correct. He was not content enough to wait. So what he doing is, Tino, because when he says, like I said, when he offered to sacrifice himself, he took on the action of the high priest. He took on the action of the priest that he had just killed. How come he couldn't see a priest? Well, remember, just a few pages prior to that, what did he do? He killed him, right? His men wouldn't strike the priest, but one of the members of his company did. An Edomite by the name of Doeg killed him. So Edomite thought, oh God, yeah, I'll gladly kill him, sure. I'd be glad. Of course, the guy was an Amalekite. You know what would you expect from a fellow like that? So even in a desperate situation like that, something else would enter. Kind of anxiety and greed, everything for gain would enter into him. So in order, if you will, to combat these things, what do we do? We've read over some of this. One of the things that, particularly in this day and age, and it's always been a problem, people are never content with enough money, right? And money is a source of all sorts of feuding between husband and wife, between a boss and his employee, his boss's boss, between a CEO of a company and, say, a board of directors, between a union management and between company and union, between people just buying anything, between a customer and a retailer, or anyone else seeking to do business. Money's always an issue. Everybody wants more of it. Because if I had this much money, I would do this and this and this. We hear that all the time, don't we? But what usually happens?
Greed.
Greed kicks in. All the stuff we just read about sets in. You got to worry about how you're going to protect it. Now you're murmuring. You find other new things to complain about. Things we didn't know about before we started complaining. Greed, envy. And we're going to read a little bit about that in Solomon. We'll get there very shortly. Luke 13:4 advises us to be content with our wages. Again, let's try Hebrews 13:5. What does that tell us? It teaches us to be, again, to be content with what we have. Let's see what Isaiah had to say about this in Isaiah 55. Isaiah 55 verse 2.
Start with 1.
I'll start with 1. Isaiah 55 verse 1. Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Because why do you spend your money for what is not bread? That is, for not food, or just simply the things that you really need. And your wages for what which does not satisfy. Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself in its abundance. What do we get out of verse 1? Because all the really good stuff, the best stuff, in fact, comes from Yahweh. Yes, Raquel.
So we need to be content with our physical needs, but we should hunger and thirst for righteousness.
Yes, that's what we're really supposed to hunger for.
Yeah.
You're correct, Raquel. Why do you spend your money for what is not bread, for what is not simple food, for what is not things that are not good enough? Oh, do I gotta eat beans again? Well, beans are good for you to start with. And so they're also fairly inexpensive. I don't mean we have to eat a steady diet of beans, for 365 days a year, but we don't have to go to Boyna Brothers Steakhouse either, do we? Tell me, at some fancy highfalutin steak French restaurant, are we really going to get any food that's really any better than what we could do with home, just being content with our wages? A lot of money spent and gone. A lot of money that could have been spent for something else. We really needed more, didn't we? And your wages for what which does not satisfy. Because after all, we have to ask, do things really satisfy us? Temporarily.
Yeah.
How many times do we buy something and then there's this instant buyer's remorse?
Yeah.
We see something better, that we like better. You buy a high dollar, like we see this all the time. I'm just going to pick off a few common examples. One guy goes out and buys himself a brand spanking new Smith & Wesson pistol. Look at this, I got this here brand new Smith & Wesson. It'll hold 13 rounds in the chamber. Then he turns around, goes, and he sees the even more brand new and upgraded model, and it's got 15 rounds. It'll hold 8. He sees another one that'll hold 18 rounds. Now he's not happy with his 13 round anymore, is he? No. No, he's not happy with that one. Some other fella goes out and buys a new car. Well, I got this fancy new car, I love it, but he sees a buddy of his or somebody else driving. He's got the same one that'll get the same performance and gas mileage, and he's driving a V6 instead of a little bitty squeaker 4-cylinder. Instead of being content with something going from point A to point B, they have to have something fancy. They buy something they can't afford. Yes, Trey, you had your...
I think it's an important distinction between the physical and our soul. Like on what you read earlier, it talks about the animals have food, they don't have to worry about clothes and everything. It's really speaking to being content with what you have in a physical means, but we also read that, for example, Proverbs 27:7, about a full soul loathes the honeycomb, but a hungry soul, everything bitter is sweet to them. So not being content in our studies and our search of scripture, but content in the physical means that we have. I think that's why Solomon was a really good example. How when he spoke to Elohim for the first time and like you spoke with him as a prayer, and he asked for wisdom to determine good and bad and stuff like that. And so and he even speaks to him saying, well, you didn't ask for a long life, you didn't ask for riches and everything. I'm gonna give you that and more because you asked for, you know, essentially a sense
And that's
of
exactly
morality.
where we're going, Trey. Very good. Yes, things don't satisfy us like we think they will so many times. But still, let's just be content that our daily needs are met, like we read of in, for the sake of time, much refer to Proverbs 12. That's verses 11 and 12, also 20 verse 13. Be content with Yahweh meeting our daily needs, as Joshua taught in Matthew 6. Now, let's turn to 1 Kings 1. We're going to go see how all this tie all this together and how all this just might work with the account of Solomon, because this actually gives us a good working model for so much of the stuff we have read. We're going to turn to 1 Kings chapter 1. There's a parallel account, 2 Chronicles 2, but in certain ways, at least for the purpose of this study, the account in Kings is actually the better one, I believe. This is following the death of David. Solomon rises to the kingship. David makes it plain, verse 28, that yes, it is Solomon that he is declared to be king, not Solomon's brother. Solomon's brother Adonijah. He listens, chapter 2, he listens to his daddy's instructions. We see the death of David. And chapter 3. Now Solomon made a treaty with the Pharaoh of Egypt and married the Pharaoh's daughter, had finished building his own house and the house of Yahweh and the wall around all of Jerusalem. While people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of Yahweh until those days. And Solomon, verse 3, see, Solomon's off to a great start. He makes peace. They'd been at odds with Egypt for years, and now they make a treaty with him. He makes a peace treaty. He marries the Pharaoh's daughter. And Solomon, verse 3, loved Yahweh, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Now the king went to Gideon to sacrifice there, for that was a great high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At night, asked the Spirit of Yahweh, and asked him to Jeremiah, asked Yahweh, what shall I give you? And Solomon said, you have shown me great mercy to your servant, my David, my father, because he walked before you in truth and in righteousness and uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, O Yahweh Malachim, you've made your servant king instead of my father David. But I'm a little child, I'm a little kid, and I don't know how to go out and I don't know how to come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be counted. Now therefore, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. Because who is able to judge this great people of yours? Verse 10. And Elohim said, the speech pleased Yahweh, and that Solomon had asked this thing. Verse 11, and Elohim said to him, because you have asked for this thing, and you have not asked for a long life for yourself, nor have you asked for riches concerning yourself, nor have you asked for the life of your enemies. He didn't ask for any of the things we just so many things we read about concerning anxiety. He didn't ask for any of that. But you have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. And behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall anyone arise after you. This guy's going to be, he's supposed to be the wisest and smartest man to ever sit on the throne of Israel. And I've also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there is not anyone like you amongst the kings all of your days. So, what was one of the teachings the Messiah gave us? Seek ye first the kingdom of Yahweh, and all these other things will be added to you. So if you walk in all my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Solomon awoke, and indeed, it had been a dream. When he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, he offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and he made a great feast for all his servants. Solomon's off to a great start. The rest of the chapter talks about an account concerning Solomon's wisdom, his judgment. Chapter 4, we go into a lot of the men he had in his administration serving. Chapter 4, verse 20, Judah and Israel were numerous as the sand of the sea in multitude, and eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon had asked for wisdom, he had asked wisely, now he's got all of Israel living happily, eating and drinking and rejoicing. Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms of the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of their life. So he had neighboring kings that paid tribute to him. They were vassal states to him. It goes a little bit into Solomon's wealth here. Now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cords of fine flour, 60 cords of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, 100 sheep, besides the deer, gazelles, roebucks, and the fatted owl. He had dominion over all the, around this side of the river from Tishpath even to Gaza, then over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side around him. Verse 29, again, Yahweh gives Solomon wisdom. And Elohim gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding, and largeness of his heart, like the sand of the seashore. So there was no room to way to gauge Solomon's heart, how large it was for Yahweh. He built a temple. All these kings come willingly to give him their servants to help him build the temple. Verse 7 covers his other buildings, the other projects, furnishings of the temple. He gets to bring the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. He makes a prayer of dedication. In chapter 8, verse 22, it starts there. And Solomon stood before the altar of Yahweh in the presence of all the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands towards the heavens. And he said, Yahweh Elohim of Israel, there is no Elohim in heaven, above or on earth like you, who keep your covenant with mercy and with your servants, and who walk with you with all their hearts. And you have kept what you have promised your servant David my father, and you have spoken with your mouth, and it is fulfilled with all your hands, as it is to this day. Now therefore, Yahweh Adonai of Israel, keep what you have promised your servant David my father, saying, You shall not fail to have a man sit before me on the throne of Israel, only if your sons take heed to their way, they walk before me as you have walked before me. So far so good. A nice, lovely round of praise for the rest of this prayer of the dedication. He goes on, Solomon goes on further in verse 54 of chapter 8, blesses the assembly. Not just for, he doesn't just ask for himself, but now he blesses the assembly. All the people of Israel, not even just for himself. Now he's asking Yahweh to bless all the people under his reign. He wanted them to have the blessing too. The dedication of the temple, beginning in verse 62, he offers, the king and all Israel offered sacrifices before Yahweh. So they offer sacrifices, peace offerings, all that. They're all together, they're feasting, it's the height of Israel, if you will. Yahweh makes another appearance to Solomon, chapter 9. Chapter 10. Back up a little bit in chapter 9, beginning in verse 15, we see Solomon's additional achievements. That's repeated in 2 Chronicles 8, verses 3 through 16. Storage cities. For storage city, what's the storage city? It's where they kept grains and food. Just like you did need to. So there would be abundance of food for a long time to come. This was for the people. This is part of the blessing he asked for the people. It wasn't just for himself. It's for the people. He wanted the people to do well too. Remember, Solomon's heart was as massive as the sand of the sea. We read earlier. Later on in this chapter, he built a fleet of ships. Verse 26, King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And these ships, these sailors, they make their voyages, and there are stories today bearing accounts on where they sail to the varying lands. There are some accounts that actually, some of these ships made it here to the land we now call the good old USA. That some of the sailors actually landed at there are accounts that some of the sailors actually landed at the mouth of the Rio Grande between Texas and Mexico, made their way up to Rio Grande, plumb up near the area of, is it Las Cruces or Las Lunas I'm trying to think of, in New Mexico, somewhere up and down there. And they make the inscription on the rock there in Hebrew. 10 Commandments in Hebrew. There's no telling where these guys all went. Chapter 10. Queen Sheba gets wind of Solomon's knowledge. She comes, visits Solomon. She brings him gifts, as is the custom. Verse 10, and she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones, and never again came such abundance of spices as Queen Sheba gave King Solomon. And now, we get to Solomon's great wealth. Let's add on to this, on to what we just read. The weight of the gold that came to Solomon each year was 666 talents of gold. I'm thinking we've read this number before somewhere. 666 talents of gold. Gets all this and all that from the traveling merchants and from the ships and sailors he sent out. From the income of traders from all the kings of Arabia, all the governors of the country, and it goes on. To the height of his glory, the details concerning his throne. And then, after having all this blessing, all this wealth start rolling in, this is where it all, somehow in all this, his heart begins to turn from Yahweh. Chapter 11, verse 1 remaining in 1 Kings. But Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh. So, in addition to the wife he already had, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, the women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Sidonians, Sidonians, the Hittites, marrying foreign women that serve foreign guys, that partake in strange pagan religions, contrary to serving Yahweh, all the foreign mighty beings, all the foreign gods, if you will. Solomon clung to these in love. Isn't that sweet? And he had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. All these cares are starting to set in now. For when it was 700 wives, 300 concubines, that's 1,000 honeydew lists. The man had 1,000 honeydew lists. How many married men can keep up with just one? I don't see any hands going up. I don't see a sing. For those who are on the outreach who are going to get this on the CD, no hands went up. You know, that I guess that's just the nature of it. I guess that's just how this is. Verse 5, or verse 4. Where did I leave us? No, verse 3. Chapter 11, verse 3. And he had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart to other beings, to other gods, and his heart was not loyal to Yahweh his Elohim, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after the Asherah and the goddesses of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. That was one where they sacrificed children, babies. Where they sacrificed small children unto Molech. Solomon also built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill east of Jerusalem, for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. His heart got carried away by so many things. Everything we see listed here, plus a whole lot more. And the concern for his wealth and everything eventually set in. Verse 9. Because it started here. A lack of contentment. He was not content with the love of just one woman. He had a taste for many. Yet, by making these alliances, what would he mean if he's marrying all these? Remember, he's not just marrying, some gal at the warehouse. He's not marrying the janitor woman at the company across the street. He's not doing that. No, he's a king. He doesn't marry the janitor. He's marrying some king, some prince's daughter. He's taking all these women in like that. He's taking in women like that. Making all these treaties with all these nations who are not turning to Yahweh. At least like some of the earlier ones did. Remember Hiram, the king of Tyre? He gladly helped build the house of Yahweh. But these other women, these other nations, they didn't think so much of that. He thought he could make a line. Evidently, the power and influence he had over these other kings, was that possibly not enough? Maybe he got to be wanting more? It's entirely possible. Because after all, we're men. We have a little weakness. It's called yes, dear. How much of this did he do in the spirit of yes, dear, so to speak? Oh, honey, this other gal here, she got this great big totem pole here, but I only had this little one. Can you make me a bigger and better one? And on and on and on it went. And the more of these women he could marry, the more of these kings and princes of these other nations he could influence. Build treaties around. And make treaties with. Do trade, business. But eventually that was his downfall. It wasn't just the women, it was what they brought in. Their gods that were contrary to Yahweh, and also not just their God itself, but also wouldn't it involve some of their beliefs, some of their principles, if you will? The principles on how people are to be treated, on how business is supposed to be done, on how to live, how to worship, and who? Yes, Trey.
Well, so you see in chapter 11, he took it a step farther, and he actually built up high places or temples or whatever for these false gods.
Yes, he did.
Different women that he had. And Yahweh spoke to him twice. He came to him saying he needed to stop doing this, and he turned away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when
And this is exactly where we're going. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh. Verse 8, he did likewise for so verse 9, Yahweh became angry with Solomon because of his heart. Because of his heart. It wasn't just the actions of his hand, it was because of his heart. His heart had turned away. His heart had turned away from Yahweh of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what Yahweh had commanded. Therefore, Yahweh said to Solomon, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and I will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days, for the sake of your father David, but I will take it out of the hand of your son. Wow. He did. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Now Solomon starts losing some of this stuff. In verse 14. Now Yahweh raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was a descendant of the king in Edom. For it happened when David was in Edom, and Joab was the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain after he had killed every male in Edom, and Hadad fled into Egypt, and certain Edomites of his father's sons servants with him. So there was a remnant of Edom that went. The story continues that he starts losing his all. Let's see, now verse 20. Then the sister of Taphanes who bore him gave us his son. When Taphanes weaned in Pharaoh's house, and Genuba was the Pharaoh's household amongst his sons. So when Hadad, he starts raising adversaries. All these alliances, all these treaties he built up, he made, they're starting to crumble apart. He sees rebellion in his own house concerning him with his son Jeroboam. Eventually, we think that Solomon liked to learn this lesson, because eventually, I like to think he did. Because this is the man who wrote book of Ecclesiastes. Let's open up to Ecclesiastes 1. He actually teaches us some very valuable lessons. Let's just start. Because this is how the story ends. When we're not content with all things, like Messiah struggled. When greed and envy enter in. When murmuring enters in. It's like a chain of events, a vicious cycle. It starts with some anxiety, and it goes to murmuring, greed, and envy set in. When it starts to murmuring, complaints, anxiety, more anxiety sets in. It seems to be a big vicious cycle. Starts with some seed of discontentment. That's all it takes one seed, and it bushels out to a huge bush. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor, in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away and another one comes. But the earth will abide forever, and the sun also rises and the sun goes down, and hastens to its place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns toward the north, and the wind whirls about continuously and comes on again in a circuit. All the rivers run to the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, they return again, and all things are full of labor, but man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. There's no end to what we can see and no end to what we can hear. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything new which may be said? See, look at here. This is new. It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the things that are yet to come, but by those who will come after. Verse 12, I, the preacher, was the king over Israel and Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and search out wisdom by concerning all that is done under the heaven. We're going to read a little bit about what began to turn his heart gradually. This burdensome task Yahweh gave me, or Elohim given me, was given to the sons of men by which they may be exercised. And I have seen all the works which they are done under the sun. Indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered. I commune within my heart, saying, look, I have attained all this greatness, and I have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. And in my heart I understood great wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly. He set out to learn wisdom. He also set out to know madness and folly. Where did we read of this? Did we read of anything like this earlier? Someone wanting to know good from me, know Yahweh plus also know good and evil? Don't we read of that in the garden? Same lesson, not learned. Much wisdom, there is much grief. He who increases knowledge increases in sorrow. Chapter 2, verse 1. I said in my heart, come now. I will test you with mirth, and therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this was also vanity. Because of all his greatness and wealth he gave him. What good is it if you can't have some type of enjoyment to it, right? Think of it this way. All the luxurious food, all the cooks, the chefs, the bakers, everything he had. I'm sorry, but kings don't live on rice and beans. He had the best of everything. I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But this was surely also a vanity. And I said of laughter, madness. And of mirth, what does it accomplish? And we can go on and on here. About the lessons Solomon learned, particularly not only from his greatness, but from his downfall as well. Not being content is like a contentment somewhere. Someone taught him, in spite of all he'd been given, all he'd been done, he undoubtedly was somehow, some way taught some type of discontentment. That's where it all started. Something else was not good enough. One wife wasn't enough. He had to have two. No, he had to have four. He had to have 8. And so on, until it grew up to, how many was it, 700?
700 wives, 300 concubines.
700 wives, 1,000 honeydew lists. How's Solomon close? Yes, Trey.
I would say Proverbs 26, 10 through 12, kind of sums up everything right there. It says, the great Elohim that formed all things, both rewards the fool and rewards transgressors. As a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There's more hope of a fool than of him. So just because he was wise doesn't mean he had all the answers. He can become wise in the wrong things. That's why I tell us they'd rather us be...
And eventually he did, Trey. You're correct. He became wise to all the wrong things, especially with all these foreign women he married. All these women that brought him the foreign gods. No wisdom in them. Verse 12, chapter 12, what's his conclusion on the matter? Now remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I had no pleasure in them, while the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are not darkened. But while it's today, don't wait. We just got through reading about some of that in some of David's study, didn't we? While the sun is light and the moon and stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. In the day in which the keepers of the house tremble and strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, that those who look through the windows grow dim. When the doors are shut in the streets, the sounding of the grinding is low. When one rises up to the sound of a bird, most like, I think of a rooster crowing, and all the daughters of music are brought low, they also are afraid of height, all the terrors in the way, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For a man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Verse 6, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain. Dave, we read about some of this in David's message. A wheel broken at the well. And the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to Elohim who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. It's all for nothing. Eventually, somebody else comes up. There's always somebody that rises up after us to do bigger and better, right? After all, it's like Joshua explained, and Solomon in all his glory was not clothed as well as the lilies of the field. Moreover, verse 9, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads. The words of scholars are like well-driven nails, given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Making of many books there is no end, and of much study is wearisome to the flesh. So let us hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear Elohim and keep all his commandments, for this is man's all. For Elohim will bring every work into judgment, and including every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. Could not figure out a better ending to this, just other than possibly a reminder of Messiah's word. We be content in all things. Be content with what we have. Yes, Tino.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something.
Feel free.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of those things that was happening with Solomon, all the things that he increased, was also covered back in Deuteronomy 17, where Yahweh had told, actually 14, where Yahweh had told Israel not to, whenever they did get a king, this is before they even had a king, and he had already addressed what was going to happen if they did get a king. And he said he should never, in verse, was it verse 5 or verse 17, he specifically says, neither shall he, talking about the king, multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So Yahweh had already covered these things, and these all the way down the line to all the kings after
That was
Solomon.
what he did.
We saw what happened.
That's exactly what he did. You're correct, Tino. Because somehow, some way, all this treasure he's getting, what was granted to him by Yahweh was, how we addressed it earlier, was that just didn't cut it, did it? There's always a human desire for more. There's always something. If there's no further question or comment, we'll close here. And we'll be back 1 o'clock next Sabbath with the Bible study from Johann's.